Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, crisis? What crisis? Donald Trump has denied allegations of chaos inside the White House as he held a cabinet meeting with his new chief of staff, John Kelly. On their immediate agenda, a series of potential flashpoints from the unrest we've just reported in Venezuela and Russia's decision to expel hundreds of US diplomats to North Korea's latest missile test. Mr. Trump promised that situation will be handled, although he didn't elaborate. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, has this report.
Good morning. This is our first cabinet meeting with General Kelly.
You don't need to be a military man or multimillionaire to sit round this president's cabinet table, but it certainly helps. Their task to govern America on behalf of a man who has proved pretty much ungovernable himself.
And we're going to make America great again. It's all about making America great again.
On the left of screen, a Secretary of State who's been reported to want to quit. On the right, a defense secretary who was on holiday when his boss tweeted his ban on transgender soldiers. And in the corner, John Kelly, the former Marine four-star general, tasked with disarming a five-star saboteur, saving Donald Trump from himself.
I predict that General Kelly will go down in terms of the position of Chief of Staff, one of the great ever.
Kelly brings a boot camp bossiness to the job, having first turned it down in May. Mr. Trump tweeted this morning that there is no chaos in the White House.
The country is optimistic, and I think the general will just add to it.
But how does this ex-Marine batten down the loose cannons when the biggest of all is sitting right there? Mission impossible, perhaps, when your foul-mouthed communications director boasts of reporting directly to the president.
The chaos presidency.
And when other grown-ups have failed to prevent palace intrigue on an Ottoman scale.
You have to let Trump be Trump. That is what has made him successful over the last 30 years. That is what the American people voted for. And anybody who thinks they're going to change Donald Trump doesn't know Donald Trump.
The reason the White House is failing is not because of staff. It's because of the president himself. This is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
And it's not often you face the prospect of nuclear war on your first day in the job. North Korea's launch on Friday of a missile capable of hitting the US mainland has changed the equation here. Mr. Trump ordered 2 supersonic bombers to fly over the Korean peninsula, and he says he'll take all necessary measures to protect America and its allies from Kim Jong-un.
We'll handle North Korea. We're going to be able to handle it. It will be handled. We handle everything.
Yesterday, the Chinese put on an extraordinary display of military muscle. President Xi in a jeep, surely intending this anniversary event to deter the US from military intervention. Though some kind of missile strike is now being discussed. The time for talking to the Chinese about restraining their neighbour is now over, says America's UN ambassador. Though a former senior advisor to President Obama on the issue says talk we must.
Now, the Chinese don't have the same sense of urgency that we do on this issue. The biggest problem with North Korea is bumbling into a war. North Korea doing something, some provocation from North Korea or something they perceive as a provocation from the South Korea, and escalating into a very serious confrontation.
Russia's military ambition was also on parade. The last and biggest Soviet nuclear submarine ever built, sailing up the Neva River to St. Petersburg. The same day, Vladimir Putin ordered the biggest reduction in American embassy staff, that's 755 people, since the Cold War ended. And so while the White House desperately tries to press the reset button at home, foreign affairs have taken an alarming turn for the worse.
Well, Jonathan is outside the State Department now. So this new lineup in the cabinet with this new chief of staff, John Kelly, I mean, are they really going to be able to concentrate now on policy instead of personalities?
I fear, John, that Mr. Trump will concentrate on neither. Look how well we're doing, he told his cabinet this morning, by which he meant, look how well I'm doing. parroting achievements that may not actually be his. He was talking about unemployment reaching a 17-year low. Well, it's not a 17-year low. It was lower still back in May. I don't think the palace intrigue will stop. No, there is still the question of the fate of Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, the beleaguered Attorney General, and indeed of Rex Tillerson, the US Secretary of State, who is meeting Mr. Trump as we speak. They're calling that Rexit here. Mr. Tillerson is said to be very unhappy. Diplomats are said to be unhappy with him. And consider this, of 130 State Department appointments which require Senate confirmation, only 10 have been filled. Now, that's partly down to Democrat intransigence, but it's mostly down to the fact that the White House and the State Department simply haven't come up with the names at the very point when the Americans are talking about some kind of symbolic missile strike on North Korea, which is pretty worrying. And to be honest, to report from Washington at the moment is to experience a strange kind of nostalgia for professional diplomats and professional politicians, which I didn't know I possessed.
Jonathan Rugman in Washington. Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is the former Ambassador Ronald Newman, who also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And I'm just wondering, Ronald Newman, how policy is exercised, indeed how anything is exercised, with the absence of so many undersecretaries, who are, after all, the people who run all these departments in the Department of State and have got their hands full.
Well, I think you've put your finger on it, although I'm still chuckling at the last comment about missing professional diplomats. We're very rarely missed. But yes, the undersecretaries are really the critical piece. The professionals in the bureaus who've stepped up to be acting assistant secretaries can, if they have the willingness and the backing, carry out the assistant secretary's functions. But the undersecretaries are the traffic cops. They have to be the ones sorting out disagreements or preventing log jams, which is what you have right now, so that a great many issues aren't getting instructions. I think that's probably less the issues of war and peace than it is keeping policy straight in all the rest of the world.
Well, but we have at least 3 theatres where there is a very serious problem in play. You've got Venezuela in Latin America, you've got the ever-present Russian issue, and you've got, clearly, North Korea, and that doesn't even mention Syria. And we, I suppose, in the West, have looked to America to lead on many of these issues. Can it lead in its present condition?
No, not very well. Although I think the present condition is not the absence of people nearly so much as it is the absence of policy.
Well, the absence of policy, yes, but I mean, there was a residual policy, certainly as far as dealing with Syria and Russia, but I suppose the change of regime does inevitably mean you need a new policy, and you're saying that so far we don't have it.
Well, you either need a new policy or you need a reaffirmation of the old policy. But when you have a new team which appears to want to be very different, it may even be very different, then it's very difficult to ask people to just proceed on autopilot discharging the old policy with no assurance that that will in fact be supported or backed up. So, new administrations have generally come in and needed a period of time for policy review, but they've usually been focused and been able to at least discharge some of them. Although I must say, in fairness, the Obama administration managed 8 years without ever having a Syrian policy.
Well, how long can the system sustain without actually having everybody in place?
It could sustain it quite a long time if it had a disciplined process of using those that it does have in place to make disciplined decisions. That doesn't seem to be happening either, so your guess is as good as mine.
That's a rather alarming point upon which to thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we'll hope things change.
I wish I had a happier closing note.
Ambassador Newman, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, now some breaking news, and according to US media reports, in the last few minutes, President Trump has decided to remove Anthony Scaramucci from his position as communications director, only 10 days after he was brought into the White House staff. Let's go straight back to Washington now, and Jonathan Rugman. Jonathan, we were just talking personalities with the ambassador a little bit earlier. Here we are again.
Yes, John, the New York Times, ABC News, MSNBC News are reporting that Mr. Trump has decided to get rid of Anthony Scaramucci just 10 days into his job. Think about it. Just over the space of a week, we've seen the resignation of Sean Spicer, the spokesman. Reince Priebus was forced out, the president's chief of staff. Now Scaramucci has gone as well. What was extraordinary last week was that the president did not publicly reprimand Mr. Scaramucci for his foul-mouthed tirade against some White House colleagues, but clearly what has happened is that Mr. Kelly has come in as the chief of staff. He has cracked the whip. He has apparently told Mr. Trump, if you want me to do this job properly, Mr. Scaramucci has to go. And so Mr. Scaramucci is leaving the scene, barely having arrived just 10 days ago. And I think this is a very good sign if you're an observer of the White House, because it does suggest that Mr. Kelly is being given some leeway to impose order on a very disorderly president.
Jonathan Rugman on another day in Washington.
Well, the story tonight is either that the White House is imploding or that it's getting itself into shape. We won't know for a while, but we do know that Anthony Scaramucci, who had made such a mark in his few days as communications director, is out. US media are reporting that the new chief of staff, General John Kelly, wanted him gone. Well, Mr. Scaramucci spun it with more grace than had been evident in most of his communications. He felt it was best to give John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team. That's what the White House statement said. At the end of a turbulent week, it does seem that President Trump has yielded to the argument that stability is better than chaos after all. Here's Chris Cook.
You're here to stay?
We'll see. I'm here to serve at the discretion of the president. If he wants me to leave tomorrow, then I'm not going to be here to stay.
Anthony Scaramucci is an ex-communications director. This interview with Sebastian Gorka from the White House was recorded slightly earlier today.
So the chief of staff was literally sworn in about 52 minutes ago. So he is setting in place the procedures by which he will run the White House internally. Where Anthony fits into that, you'd have to ask General Kelly or talk to Anthony. But let's give him more than just 52 minutes and find out later in the week.
We didn't need that long. Here's a quick recap of how he got here.
I love the president, and I'm very, very loyal to the president.
When Mr. Scaramucci got the job 10 days ago, the White House press secretary, Sean Spicer, resigned over that appointment. Then, last week, Mr. Scaramucci publicly attacked the then White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, calling him a paranoiac.
Number one, it was an honor and a privilege to serve President Trump. I think
Mr. Priebus was replaced last week, so that was seen as a win for Mr. Scaramucci. But Mr. Priebus's replacement, General John Kelly, demanded Mr. Scaramucci's removal in turn. Mr. Scaramucci's attack last week on Mr. Priebus and others in the White House may have made that an easier sale.
Look, the president certainly felt that Anthony's comments were inappropriate for a person in that position. And he didn't want to burden General Kelly also with that line of succession.
Mr. Scaramucci was actually the second communications director following Mike Dubke, who resigned in June. The current National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, is also the second National Security Advisor. The first National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, resigned after misleading the Vice President on issues around the Russian influence scandal. Irritation with the investigation into that scandal eventually led to President Trump firing the FBI director, James Comey. We also know the president may be about to fire his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, because Mr. Sessions recused himself from that investigation. Maybe General Kelly will make the White House work. But they've just had a humiliation on healthcare in Congress. That Russian links investigation is still rumbling on, and it's still not a normal White House.
That up sum was from Chris Cook, hastily put together. Well, the BBC's North American editor is John Sopel. Of course, he joins us now from outside the White House. So, John, how many in DC saw that coming quite as quickly as that?
I would love to tell you that we all saw that coming. The truth is I was in the White House briefing room a few hours ago, and we were sitting around shooting the breeze and saying, you know what, it all suddenly feels a very much great deal calmer compared to last week. Donald Trump going on holiday at the end of the week for a couple of weeks. It's probably going to be, you know, a slight lull now and then probably absolutely nothing to do for a couple of weeks. And then we were sitting, and then there came the flash that Anthony Scaramucci was going. Not quite as quiet then. And even we understand that Mr. Scaramucci was escorted off the premises. So 10 days ago, he was seen as the answer to Donald Trump's prayers on communication and press relations. Now gone, departed.
And briefly, John, what I should say, this is incredibly absorbing. And every minute we're talking about the personnel and the comings and goings. We're not talking about healthcare or defence or global problems or Paris climate deals or anything.
And I think that's why it is important for General Kelly to have notched up this victory today, but for future victories. He wants to bring a sense of order, process, a chain of command, a proper reporting structure into the White House, so that when you are dealing with issues like, I don't know, North Korea or even domestic policy questions, you've got a White House that is pulling in one direction, not going off in different directions, with everyone briefing against each other, which has been the hallmark of these past 6 months.
John, thank you very much indeed. Well, if you were watching on Wednesday, you would have seen what I think was the only overseas broadcast interview with Anthony Scaramucci in that post. And it was, of course, our very own Emily Maitlis who captured that scoop. You had a close-up glimpse, actually, of the chaos of the whole thing anyway, the way you got the interview.
Yeah, I mean, even before this happened, Evan, there was a joke doing the rounds that the former Apprentice boss, one Donald Trump, thought he had to eliminate one person each week. He'd somehow misunderstood the role of the president. And now, of course, we're on more than one a week. But I spoke to him exclusively, as you said, for Newsnight less than a week ago, and truth be told, there was a certain amount of chaos even then. To put this in context, I was standing pretty much where John Sopel was a week ago. That interview should never have happened. Scaramucci was walking past behind me taking selfies, as is the one, you could say, of the Trump administration just before that now infamous dinner with Sean Hannity and President Trump himself. And when I realised who it was, I pulled off my mic and pulled out my earpiece and I went over and I tried to lure him onto Newsnight. It was the thing that any journalist in my position would have been. And the curious thing was that he didn't seem to need to refer upwards. He didn't ask me what I was going to ask him about. He didn't need to know how long the interview would be or what it was about. He was flattered. He came on without knowing those things. That's kind of what we
like about the guy in
some ways. We love that. I mean,
yes,
as a journalist, he is about as good as it gets. And when I asked him about the British story of the day, you'll remember it was the Brexit deal, coronation chicken, to coin a phrase. He fessed up straight away. He said, I know nothing whatsoever about your chicken story, but I promise you that if you come back in a week's time, I will know chicken 100%. I will be word perfect. Okay. Unfortunately, that will never happen. But the point is, there was an impromptu, and that has been kind, seat of the pants attitude, not just for me, but for him then.
But also, I mean, the whole way this has played out, it points to a kind of deeper structural issues about the way the White House runs.
This is the curious thing. I mean, I talk to members of the Trump administration quite often, not just Scaramucci, and the grown-ups, shall we say, are always very keen to point out, they tell me, ignore the shtick. That is their way of saying there's a lot of stuff which is part hysteria, it's noise, it's tweets, it's the press briefings, it's President Trump making a lot of noise around what's going on. And he says behind all that there is actually a strategy. There is something going on smoothly beneath the surface that the media doesn't see because the rest of the stuff is so entertaining. Now, there is a sense perhaps tonight that John Kelly has come in and decided to get across that and tighten the ship. One member of the administration told me in confidence they always get excited when they see, and I quote, recognisable adult behaviour from the Trump administration. That equates to a good day for them. So perhaps this is General Kelly's way of saying it is not enough to go around telling people like me, the media, to ignore the shtick. We have to shut down the circus, kill the clowns, make all the fanfare go away, and only then will people understand there is actually a strategy in the White House. And if there really isn't, then we really will see that too, Evan.
Emily, thanks. Well, joining us now from New York is Jacob Weisberg, editor-in-chief of the online news site Slate and the presenter of the Trumpcast podcast. Well, Jacob, the big question is Kelly going to instill some discipline on this tumultuous White House?
Well, first, Evan, let us just pause to savor for a minute what we've just been through. I think in your wonderful interview last week, Scaramucci said he wasn't a backstabber, he was a front stabber. but he didn't go quite so far as to say he would be a front self-stabber with such proficiency. I mean, even in this White House where the shelf life of aid seems to range somewhere between milk and yogurt, this was incredibly swift. I think General Kelly has a difficult task before him. I have no doubt that he can function effectively as a gatekeeper for Donald Trump. The question is whether President Trump will allow himself to be gate-kept. We know what a strong chief of staff looks like in the White House and how they operate. There have been many, many examples over the past several presidencies, but that entails the president being willing not to have separate private channels of communication all the time, to accept a certain discipline, which Trump so far has shown zero ability to do. Trump
has seen, and some of his staff have almost sort of professed it as a philosophy, that chaos is a way of getting things done, smashing up systems that are broken and need replacing, and this is all part of disruption. Do you think Trump is persuaded, deep down persuaded, that that is not the way to get things done, that you do need, you know, just a bit of traditional kind of governmental competence?
No, I don't think he is persuaded. I mean, I don't know that chaos is his theory, but it works for him. Creating more chaos, at the very least, always changes the subject when he's in trouble from one crisis to another. And I think you've seen even in the last week, which is by any standard about as chaotic as the White House has gotten. Of course, Trump tweeted this morning that there is no White House chaos. But, you know, what it's done is it's remove the possibility of attention for anything other than Trump. So the Democrats tried to roll out their plan for the midterms. Senator Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, announced their better deal, which is meant to be their big initiative heading towards the midterms, and there was no oxygen left for it. I mean, it was just a brief flurry because within a few hours, Trump was attacking his own attorney general, and within a few days, he was bringing in Scaramucci, and you know there only so much space in the news, and no one was really able to get to anything beyond Trump's chaos.
No room for politics as normal. Just in terms of who's up and who's down, which of the different Donald Trumps, if you like, is going to prevail? The big question is Steve Bannon, who's obviously been a bit quiet in the last week to some extent, but where's he out of all of this?
Well, it's funny, you remember Bannon got in trouble for appearing on the cover of Time magazine with a headline that suggested he was the real power rather than Trump. And there's sort of nothing riskier to do in the Trump White House than claim the lion's share of the attention. But I do think Bannon has learned his lesson. I mean, he's been much less visible and prominent. There is this interesting new book about him and Trump out, but he doesn't seem to be making any effort to put himself in front of the cameras the way Anthony Scaramucci obviously was doing all the time. So I think Bannon has hopes of survival, but how he will get along with the new chief of staff and the various other officials, it remains to be seen. You wouldn't want to predict longevity for anybody in the White House.
But on the other hand, you would have to say Kelly is looking pretty indispensable at the moment, General Kelly, because Trump, it would be embarrassing to lose Kelly in the next 3 months. And the way they were talking about him at the press briefing this evening as having full authority, new structure and discipline, everybody in the White House is reporting to Kelly. You have to think now Trump is trusting this guy.
I would remain skeptical. I think Trump will do what he wants to do, but I think it does place some limits around Trump's behavior. And probably the most important is I think it'll make it very difficult for Trump to fire the independent counsel, Robert Mueller, because I think Kelly would probably lay down in front of the truck on that one, and Trump would be faced with the choice of very embarrassingly losing his new chief of staff or going through with what he probably does want to do.
Jacob Weisberg, thanks very much.